There is a particular moment in the evening when the world begins to loosen its grip. It happens quietly. No announcement is made. No clock rings to mark it. Perhaps you have already noticed it tonight. The light in the room feels softer than it did earlier. The edges of things, walls, furniture, the window no longer demand your attention. Sounds from outside arrive more gently now, as if they too are tired and moving more slowly. This is not a moment that asks anything of you. There is nothing you need to remember. Nothing you need to understand. Nothing you need to hold on to. If it feels comfortable, you may allow your shoulders to sink just a little. Let your breathing find its own pace. There is no correct rhythm, only the one your body already knows. Tonight's story is not here to wake the mind. It is here to let it wander, then rest. Long before our days were measured by glowing screens and silent alarms, human life followed a different kind of clock. Not one that hurried, not one that judged productivity, but one that moved in circles, steady, predictable, and deeply reassuring. Imagine for a moment a night many centuries ago. Stone walls stand thick and cool, holding the day's warmth just beneath their surface. A monastery rests quietly at the edge of a small European village, its shape barely visible under the moonlight. The building does not loom or impress. It simply exists solid, patient, unchanging. Inside, a single candle flickers. Its flame bends slightly, responding to a breath of air you cannot feel but somehow know is there. And then, from a distance, comes the sound. A bell. Not loud, not urgent, just present. It rings once, then fades into the night. Moments later, another answers it, perhaps from a neighboring monastery beyond the hills. Together, they form a rhythm older than memory, a rhythm that does not ask anyone to hurry. For the monks who live here, time is not something to chase. It is something to move alongside. Their days unfold in gentle repetition, waking, prayer, work, rest, silence. Each moment is held within the sound of the bell, which arrives again and again, like a steady breath. No one wonders what comes next. The bell already knows. Outside these walls, villagers sleep in small, shared spaces. Rooms are simple. A table, a bench, a bed tucked behind heavy curtains. Those curtains are important. They do not offer true privacy as we understand it today. Instead, they create a feeling of warmth, of enclosure, of being held inside fabric and shadow. When drawn closed, they soften the world. The bed becomes its own small room, a space within a space, a quiet refuge from drafts, from eyes, from the wandering chill of the night. As people settle in, they perform the same small gestures their parents did, and their parents before them. Hands smoothing cloth, a ring touched without thought, a breath released as the curtains fall. These gestures are not dramatic. They do not announce their meaning. Yet they carry something essential, a sense that tonight is like last night, and tomorrow will arrive in its own time. If you have ever closed your curtains and felt the room change instantly, become softer, safer, you are touching the edge of that same ancient habit. A quiet inheritance passed down without words. The bell rings again. Somewhere in the monastery, a monk pauses mid-step. He does not rush. He simply turns, adjusts his robe, and continues toward the chapel. Stone floors are cool beneath his feet. The air smells faintly of wax and old wood. Each sound echoes gently, never sharply. There is no tension here. No sense of arrival or departure. Only movement within stillness. This world does not divide time into success and failure. It divides it into moments of presence. And slowly, almost without noticing, these rhythms begin to drift outward, from monasteries into villages, from villages into customs, from customs into the smallest details of daily life, a way of resting, a way of greeting, a way of marking the end of the day. None of it arrives all at once. There is no single beginning. It simply accumulates, layer by layer, generation by generation. If tonight your thoughts feel scattered, that is all right. This story does not require your attention to stay sharp. You may listen as if from another room, or as if the words are floating past like lantern light on water. Soon, We will follow these quiet habits, further watching how simple routines shape the way we live, rest, and feel safe even now. But for the moment, there is no need to go anywhere. The bell has rung, the curtains are closing, and time, just for now, has agreed to slow. As the night deepens, the monastery settles into its familiar stillness. Stone walls, worn smooth by centuries of passing hands, hold the quiet like a promise. Nothing here is in a hurry, nothing needs to be. The bell that marked the hour has already faded into memory, leaving behind a soft echo that seems to linger in the air rather than the ears. For those who live by its rhythm, this sound is not an interruption, it is reassurance. Inside the chapel, candlelight trembles gently, stretching shadows across wooden beams darkened by time. The monks sit together, not close enough to touch, yet near enough to share warmth. No one speaks. There is no need. Silence here is not empty. It is full of breath, of patience, of the shared understanding that this moment has happened many times before and will happen many times again. Beyond the monastery walls, the village sleeps. Houses are small, often no more than a single room. Families share the same space, children, parents, grandparents, each finding rest in proximity rather than separation. At night, the boundaries between people soften. Beds are heavy with layered fabric, wool blankets, rough linen sheets, and always the curtain. Pulled closed, it creates a boundary that feels gentle rather than firm. Not a wall, but a suggestion. A reminder that rest is allowed here. When the wind moves outside, it brushes the shutters softly, like a hand passing over water. Inside, the air remains calm. The day has had its say. Now it is time to let go. If you imagine this scene slowly, the curtain falling into place, the weight of blankets settling, the distant echo of bells still humming faintly in the background, you may notice something familiar. Even now, centuries later, many of us still repeat these same gestures. We dim the lights. We draw the curtains. We arrange pillows and blankets just so. Not because someone told us to, but because our bodies remember what safety feels like. Long before sleep was studied, optimized, or discussed, it was practiced, gently, repetitively, with trust. In the daylight hours of this older world, life unfolds with similar softness. Morning begins not with urgency, but with return. The bell sounds again, calling people back to themselves. Fields are tended. Meals are prepared slowly. Hands move with practiced ease. Tools are simple. A wooden spoon, a clay bowl, a metal fork still unfamiliar enough to be noticed. When it first appears on tables, the fork is not yet ordinary. Some see it as unnecessary, others find it curious. But gradually, quietly, it stays. Not because it is revolutionary, but because it makes eating calmer, cleaner, more contained. Like so many things, it becomes part of the rhythm not through force, but through repetition. The same is true of greetings. A handshake, once a deliberate act of trust, begins to lose its edge of meaning. What was once a gesture to show empty hands becomes simply a way of acknowledging another presence. The original reason fades, the comfort remains. And so it goes. Rituals soften over time. They shed their urgency. They keep their shape. The week itself begins to find a pattern. Work and rest are not seen as opposites, but as companions. Days of labor are followed by days of pause. Feasts arrive not as indulgence, but as markers, gentle pauses in the flow of time. These pauses matter. They tell the body it is allowed to stop. They tell the mind it is safe to wander. In this world, productivity is not measured in speed. It is measured in continuity. If you listen closely, you may hear how this way of living hums beneath modern life. Weekends still arrive. Meals still gather people together. We still mark beginnings and endings with small, familiar actions, even when we do not know why. And perhaps that is the quiet power of tradition. It does not shout its purpose. It whispers it again and again until it feels like our own thought. As evening approaches once more, the monastery prepares for night. Candles are trimmed, Doors are checked, not out of fear, but habit. The bell will soon ring again. Somewhere, a monk pauses near a narrow window. Outside, the sky deepens into blue-black calm. Stars appear, not all at once, but gradually one, then another, until the darkness feels textured rather than empty. He does not count them. He does not name them. He simply looks. There is comfort in knowing that others before him have stood in the same place, seen the same sky, heard the same bell. Time stretches not forward, but outward. And in that stretching, something loosens. If your own thoughts drift now, that is welcome. This story does not require focus. It offers companionship. Soon, we will follow one small object, one quiet habit more closely, tracing how it moved from necessity to comfort, from function to feeling. But there is no rush to arrive. For now, let the night hold you gently, as it has held so many before. The bell is preparing to ring. Night, in the older world, is not something to conquer. It is something to prepare for. As the sun lowers itself behind fields and forests, the air cools gradually, as if reminding everyone to slow their movements. Shadows lengthen without urgency, voices soften, tasks naturally find their ending places. Inside homes, the shift is subtle but unmistakable. A bowl is rinsed, a bench is nudged closer to the wall. A candle is lit not to brighten the room fully, but to signal that the day has released its hold. And then, almost without thinking, someone reaches for the curtain. It hangs from a simple wooden rail, heavy with woven fabric. Its edges are worn. Its pattern familiar enough to be invisible. This curtain is not decoration. It is intention. When drawn closed around the bed, it creates something deeply human, a sense of being held within boundaries that are soft, forgiving, and temporary. Inside this small enclosure, the world feels quieter. Drafts are slowed. Light becomes diffused. Even thoughts seem to lower their voices. For centuries, this simple gesture has meant the same thing. You are done for the day. You are allowed to rest. The curtain does not promise safety in an absolute sense. It offers something gentler and more realistic. Comfort. A feeling that whatever waits outside can wait a little longer. People sleep close together in these spaces. Children breathe steadily. Adults shift, settle, sigh. No one expects silence to be perfect. The creak of wood, a cough, the distant bark of a dog. These sounds are not disturbances. They are signs of life continuing nearby. In this closeness, the idea of privacy is different from what we know today. Privacy is not about separation. It is about permission to soften, to release vigilance, to be unobserved in small, human ways. The curtain becomes a kind of portable room. A room made not of stone but of fabric and trust. If you think about your own sleeping space tonight, you may notice echoes of this design. The blanket that wraps around your shoulders, the weight pillows form a boundary. The dim glow filtered through curtains or blinds. These are not accidents of comfort. They are inheritances, passed down not through instruction, but through repetition. In monasteries, the same principle appears again and again. Cells are small, sparse, deliberately contained. A bed, a stool, a shelf, nothing excess, nothing demanding. The purpose is not deprivation, it is focus. Within these tight spaces, the mind has fewer places to wander. The body learns the dimensions of rest. At night, monks retire quietly, their movements slow, economical. Curtains are drawn, candles extinguished. Darkness arrives not as an absence, but as a presence. And with it, a different kind of awareness. The awareness that this moment, this exact configuration of silence, fabric, breath, has happened countless times before. There is comfort in repetition. It tells us that we are not alone in our tiredness, that others have needed this same pause. Over time, the curtain leaves the monastery and the village alike. It evolves. Beds move into separate rooms. Walls grow thinner, then thicker. Doors replace fabric. But the feeling remains. We still seek enclosure when we sleep. Still close something between ourselves and the outside world. A blind. A screen dimmed. Each act says the same thing in a different language. Not now. Tomorrow can wait. There's a softness to this continuity. No single person decided it. No authority declared it necessary. It stayed because it worked. Because it felt right. If you allow yourself to imagine this long thread of evenings, one night folding gently into the next, one pair of hands after another drawing fabric closed, you may sense how deeply rest is woven into human memory. Even anxiety, when it appears, is held differently here. It is not analyzed, not named. It is soothed through routine, through warmth, through familiar gestures. When uncertainty arises, people do not search for answers, they search for patterns. And patterns, when repeated slowly enough, become comfort. As the curtain settles into place, it creates a soft darkness that does not demand sleep, but invites it. Inside, breathing deepens naturally. Muscles loosen without instruction. The body remembers what the mind forgets. That rest is not earned. It is allowed. Outside the curtain, time continues its slow movement. Stars arc across the sky. The bell rings again, distant and uninsistent. Somewhere another curtain is being drawn. If you find yourself drifting now, your thoughts blurring at the edges, there is nothing to correct. This story does not need to be followed to its end. It is content to walk beside you until you no longer need it. Soon, we will step back from the intimate space of the bed and look outward again at how these quiet habits shaped entire weeks, seasons, and ways of living. But for now, remain here if you wish, inside the soft enclosure, inside the familiar dark, where the world grows smaller and rest feels possible. Morning arrives without insistence. There is no sharp boundary between night and day, only a gradual easing darkness thinning, light returning with patience. The world does not snap awake. It stretches. In the monastery, the bell sounds again. Its tone is familiar, untroubled by urgency. Those who hear it do not check the time. They already know where they are meant to be. This sound does not divide life into fragments. It gathers it. And slowly, over generations, this gathering begins to shape something larger than a single day. A week, not yet the week you know today. Not measured in deadlines or calendars pinned to walls, but a breathing structure expanding and releasing. Work fills certain days with predictable effort. Hands move through fields, kitchens, workshops. Bodies tire in honest ways. There is satisfaction in repetition. And then there is pause, not as a reward, not as escape, but as part of the design. In villages shaped by monastic rhythms, days of rest are not empty. They are simply different. People wake a little later. Meals stretch longer. Conversations wander without destination. Clothing feels softer against the skin because it is worn without purpose. Festivals appear not as spectacles, but as gentle interruptions. Music drifts. Food is shared. Laughter rises and falls like wind through leaves. No one measures efficiency here. No one asks if the time is being used well. Time is being lived. These pauses are not accidental. They are intentional spaces where the body relearns its own pace. Over centuries, this rhythm settles into collective memory. The idea that not every day must carry the same weight. That some days are meant to hold, not push. Even when belief systems shift, even when societies change, this structure remains. It is too useful to lose. You can still feel it now. The way Friday evening feels different before anything actually changes. The way Sunday mornings carry a quieter air, even in busy cities. These sensations do not come from schedules alone. They come from inherited expectation. A shared understanding that the week, like the breath, must expand and contract. In the monastery, monks understand this deeply. Their days are divided not to control them, but to protect them from blurring into exhaustion. Prayer follows work. Work follows silence. Silence follows sound. Each phase prepares the body for the next. And when rest arrives, it is not filled with guilt. It is accepted as necessary. In villages beyond the walls, people may not name these principles, but they live them. They know when it is time to gather, when it is time to pause, when it is time to sleep without explanation. If anxiety appears, it is often soothed not through answers, but through return to meals at the same table. Return to familiar days, return to the promise that rest is coming. Even hardship moves differently within this structure. There are difficult seasons, yes, cold winters, poor harvests, but even these are met within rhythm. There is still night after day. There is still rest after effort. And this continuity carries people through. If you consider your own week, you may sense where this ancient pattern still speaks. The quiet relief when the workday ends. The subtle softening when the weekend approaches. The strange heaviness when the cycle begins again. These feelings are not personal failures or successes. They are echoes. Memories older than language, reminding the body how to move through time. In the evenings of this older world, families prepare for rest with no expectation of entertainment. Stories are told softly, sometimes repeated, sometimes unfinished. Children learn not from instruction, but from atmosphere. They learn that rest is something shared, that slowing down is not dangerous. As darkness gathers again, the bell rings one final time, not to command, to close. This sound marks the day's gentle ending. And once more, the curtains are drawn. Inside rooms, breathing synchronizes. Thoughts loosen their grip. The week continues its slow turning, not rushing toward anything, simply moving because it always has. If you find yourself feeling heavier now, not tired in a strained way, but pleasantly weighted, that is the rhythm doing its work. The body recognizing familiar cues. The mind releasing its need to track time. There is no need to remember which day this is. No need to anticipate the next. Tonight, you are allowed to exist between moments. Soon we will look even further outward, toward how these rhythms shaped not just weeks but entire lifetimes. How people learned to mark beginnings and endings without fear. But there's no need to go there yet. For now, let the week breathe around you. Let the night hold its place. And if sleep arrives early, quietly, without announcement, that is exactly how it has always done. As weeks turn quietly into months, and months into years, people in this older world begin to notice something subtle. Life does not feel like a straight path. It feels like a series of gentle thresholds, not sharp beginnings, not abrupt endings, but moments where something shifts almost imperceptibly and only later is it understood. A child grows taller without anyone seeing it happen. A face changes slowly, line by line, until one day it feels unfamiliar and deeply known at the same time. Time is not counted here so much as it is marked by seasons, by rituals, by repeated gatherings that say, without words, you are still here, we are still together. In villages shaped by old rhythms, life events do not demand spectacle. They ask for presence. A birth is welcomed quietly, not hidden but held gently. A name is spoken aloud. Food is shared. Hands touch fabric, wood, skin. The child is folded into the existing rhythm, not placed at the center of it. There is comfort in this. The message is clear, even if unspoken. You belong to something already moving. As years pass, children learn the calendar not by numbers, but by feeling. They know when it is time for longer days. When the air changes, when certain meals return to the table. They recognize holidays by smell, by sound, by texture. The crackle of a fire. The sweetness of preserved fruit. The echo of singing that only appears once a year. These markers do not rush them forward. They anchor them. In monasteries, the marking of time takes on a quieter, more internal form. Lives that are measured not by milestones, but by devotion to repetition. Days blend into each other in a way that does not erase them, but smooths their edges. A monk may not remember every prayer he has spoken. He does not need to. The prayers remember him. Years pass like this. Hair grays, steps slow. No one announces these changes. They are noticed gradually, with kindness. A younger monk carries a heavier load. Another takes more time to sit. These adjustments are not framed as loss. They are framed as movement. In the world beyond the monastery walls, people experience aging in much the same way. There is no obsession with youth as an ideal, no urgent attempt to preserve a single moment. Instead, there is acceptance of sequence. This comes after that, and that in turn will give way to something else. Even endings are approached softly. When someone grows old enough that their presence begins to thin when they sleep more, speak less, and listen longer, the community adjusts its rhythm around them. Voices lower. Chairs are moved closer. Stories are repeated without impatience. There is no rush to resolve anything. Life is allowed to taper. This gentleness does not erase grief, but it gives it space to exist without panic. Loss is understood not as rupture, but as continuation in another form. Someone's place at the table may be empty, but the rhythm of the meal remains, and that too is a kind of comfort. If you pause now and notice your own breathing, you may feel how naturally it follows this pattern. Inhale, exhale, a beginning, an ending, neither rushed, neither forced. Your life too is made of these small thresholds, moments when something shifts without asking permission. A memory surfaces unexpectedly, a feeling softens on its own. You do not need to chase these moments. They arrive when there is space. That is what these old rhythms offered. Space. Space for life to unfold without being constantly observed. In the evenings, after the day has settled, people sit together without agenda. Sometimes they speak, sometimes they do not. The fire dims slowly. Shadows stretch and merge. No one feels compelled to fill the silence. Silence is not emptiness here. It is fullness without shape. As the night deepens, familiar gestures return. Hands reach for curtains. Lights are lowered. Bodies find the positions they have learned over years. The bed receives them without ceremony, and once again time loosens its hold. If sleep feels near now, that is not coincidence. This story moves at the pace of remembering, not learning. There is nothing new you must carry forward. Only the reassurance that life has always known how to move gently when allowed. Soon, we will follow one last quiet thread, how even in times of change and uncertainty, these rhythms adapted without breaking. But there is no need to follow closely. You may listen as if from a distance, or let the words fade into texture rather than meaning. The night does not require your attention. It only offers its presence. Change in this older world rarely arrives with noise. It does not announce itself as a turning point. It slips in gently, altering the shape of familiar things without breaking them. A path curves slightly differently after a season of rain. A doorway is widened to allow slower steps. A tradition shifts its hour, but not its meaning. People notice these changes not all at once, but gradually, often only after they have already settled in. In the monasteries, this quiet adaptation is part of daily life. Rules remain, but they breathe. Schedules hold, but they bend. If a brother grows tired more quickly, his tasks change. If winters become harsher, meals warm and lengthen. Nothing is framed as failure. It is simply adjustment. This way of moving through time creates a kind of resilience that does not resist change but absorbs it. Outside the monastery walls, villages experience the same gentle evolution. Tools improve slowly. Homes shift shape. Paths become roads. Yet the rhythms remain. Morning still arrives softly. Evening still invites rest. The week still opens and closes like a calm hand. Even when uncertainty enters, a poor harvest, an unfamiliar ruler, a changing climate, people return instinctively to what has always steadied them. Shared meals, repeated gestures. The drawing of curtains at night, these are not small comforts. They are anchors. If you have ever found yourself returning to a familiar routine during a difficult time, making the same tea, walking the same route, listening to the same quiet sound, you are participating in the same ancient practice. Stability does not come from certainty, it comes from continuity. In times of transition, monasteries often become places of refuge. Not because they promise answers, but because they offer rhythm. People arrive tired. They leave calmer. Nothing dramatic has happened. No problem has been solved. But something inside has settled. The bell still rings. Meals still arrive. The day still closes, and that is enough. As centuries pass, the world outside grows more complex. Cities expand. Trade routes stretch farther. Ideas move faster. Yet even as life accelerates, people continue to carve out spaces of slowness, a pause before a meal, a day set aside for rest, a quiet moment at night when lights are lowered and voices soften. These habits persist not because they are enforced, but because they are needed. They remind the body that it is allowed to slow. They remind the mind that it does not need to carry everything at once. In this way, history does not move away from rest. It carries it forward, sometimes hidden, sometimes transformed, but always present. If you listen closely, you can hear it beneath modern life, in the way a room feels calmer when the lights dim, in the instinct to sit rather than stand when tired, in the relief that comes when the day finally releases you. These are not weaknesses. They are inheritances. As night falls once more in our story, the familiar sequence begins again. Doors are secured not out of fear, but habit. Candles are extinguished carefully. Curtains are drawn with the same practiced motion. Inside these spaces, people do not worry about what tomorrow will bring. Tomorrow has always come, and it will come again. For now, the present moment is enough. Breathing slows, thoughts become less defined. The edges of the day blur. If your own mind feels softer now, less eager to organize or anticipate, that is the rhythm at work. You do not need to follow every word. You do not need to remember where we are in the story. You are exactly where you need to be. Soon, we will begin to bring this long journey gently inward, toward the listener, toward you, connecting these ancient rhythms to the quiet space you occupy tonight. But there is no need to prepare. The transition will be as gentle as everything else. For now, let the night do what it has always done best. Let it hold change without asking you to solve it. Let it carry you without effort. The world can wait. At some point, without a clear boundary, the story begins to turn inward. Not away from history, but toward the one who is listening. Because these rhythms we have been walking through were never meant to remain distant. They were always meant to arrive here, in this room, on this night. You may notice now how familiar everything feels. The soft light, the quiet air, the subtle awareness of your own body resting where it is. You are not so far from that older world. The materials have changed. The pace of daylight has quickened, but the deeper needs remain the same. To feel held by routine, to feel carried by repetition, to feel that rest is not something you must justify. In the monasteries we visited, monks did not lie awake wondering if they deserved sleep. Sleep arrived because it always had. In the villages beyond the walls, people did not optimize their evenings. They followed them. And tonight, in your own way, you are doing the same. You have allowed the day to end. That is not a small thing. Even if the day felt unfinished, even if thoughts linger at the edges of your awareness, you have come to this moment anyway. That choice, conscious or not, is part of a long human story. For thousands of years, people have gathered at the edge of night with the same quiet hope that the world will soften enough to let them rest. If you imagine those countless evenings layered one upon another, candles dimming, curtains closing, breathing slowing, you may sense that you are not alone in this moment. You never have been. Somewhere in the past, someone lay down with worries not unlike your own. They did not resolve them. They rested anyway. Somewhere else, someone listened to a familiar sound, the bell, the wind, the murmur of voices, and let it carry them into sleep. Tonight, this story becomes that sound. Not something to follow, something to rest beside. If your thoughts drift now, that is welcome. You do not need to guide them back. This is not a path that requires attention. It is a circle that holds you whether you watch it or not. You might notice sensations becoming simpler. The weight of your body supported. The temperature of the air. the gentle rise and fall of breath. These are the same sensations people have noticed at night for centuries. Before language, before calendars, before history learned how to write itself down. The body has always known when it is safe to rest. It knows now. In the older world, stories were not told to impress or persuade. They were told to keep people company until sleep arrived. Sometimes the storyteller noticed listeners drifting away mid-sentence. This was not failure, it was success. The story had done its work. If you feel that same drifting now, that gentle slipping away from words into feeling, there is nothing to correct. You are allowed to go. The circle holds even when you step out of awareness. In this quiet space, there is no expectation. You are not asked to remember lessons. You are not asked to reflect deeply. You are simply invited to be here, and then, when the time feels right, to not be here at all. If you wish, you might imagine the familiar gesture returning once more. The drawing of a curtain, the dimming of light, the softening of sound. This gesture exists not just in rooms, but in the mind, a way of saying, enough for today. The night accepts this without question. It does not ask what you accomplished. It does not ask what remains undone. It offers itself as it always has, steady, patient, unchanged. Soon, we will begin to let the story loosen even further, allowing words to thin, spaces to widen, and meaning to dissolve into sensation. But there is no need to anticipate that shift. Your body already knows what comes next. You may find that listening becomes less active, that sentences blur, that images fade before fully forming. This is the same soft threshold people have crossed for centuries. They did not name it. They simply allowed it. And tonight, so can you. The rhythm continues whether you follow it or not. The circle remains unbroken. You are safe to rest inside it. There comes a point in every gentle evening when words begin to lose their edges. They are still present, still moving softly through the air, but they no longer ask to be held. They drift, they thin, they become more like texture than meaning. This is where the story naturally belongs now, not in explanation. Not in history, but in atmosphere. In the older world, this moment was understood instinctively. Storytellers would lower their voices. Phrases would lengthen. Silences would appear between sentences, not as pauses to be filled, but as spaces to rest within. No one feared these spaces. They were signs that the night was doing its work. If you notice now that you are listening differently, less with the mind, more with the body, that is exactly right. You may not remember the last sentence clearly. You may not remember the one before it. Memory is no longer required. Long ago, when lamps burned low and rooms were lit only by embers, people allowed themselves to slip into this state without naming it. Eyes would close not all at once, but gradually. Breathing would slow without instruction. The body would grow heavier, as if gently anchored. Stories did not end. They simply stopped being needed. The same is true here. Nothing dramatic remains to be said, only the quiet continuation of rhythm. Imagine, if you wish, the familiar sounds returning once more. A distant bell, now barely audible. The soft movement of fabric settling. The faint hush of night air against stone or glass. These sounds do not form a scene anymore. They form a feeling. A sense that the world has narrowed to exactly the size it needs to be. In this space, there is no timeline. Past and present lose their separation. The monastery, the village, your room, all exist together, layered gently rather than divided. Time becomes circular again, a breath in, a breath out. Nothing more is required. If thoughts arise, they do so without urgency. They may drift across awareness like clouds, unexamined and unheld. There is no need to follow them, no need to push them away. They will move on when they are ready. The body understands this language. It has heard it before. Every night, in one form or another, it has been invited into rest. Sometimes gently, sometimes reluctantly. Tonight, the invitation is patient. There is no expectation that you fall asleep at a certain moment. There is no measure of success or failure. Rest is already happening. Even wakeful stillness is a form of rest. In the older world, people trusted this. They did not worry if sleep arrived immediately. They allowed darkness to do its work in its own time. Eventually, it always did. As words continue to soften, you may notice sensations becoming simpler still. Warmth, weight, stillness. The mind, having nothing left to solve, begins to release its grip naturally. This is not something you do. It is something that happens when effort is no longer required. If you drift away from the story entirely, that is welcome. The story does not need an audience anymore. It has returned to what it always was, a gentle companion at the edge of sleep. Somewhere beyond awareness, the rhythm continues. Curtains are drawn, lights are dimmed. Breathing deepens. The night moves forward, not rushing, not pausing, just flowing. You are carried within it. Nothing needs to be remembered. Nothing needs to be decided. If the words blur now, let them blur. If they disappear, let them go. This space does not collapse without them. It remains quiet, stable, enough. Soon there will be nothing left to follow. Only rest. At this depth of the night, rest no longer feels personal. It feels shared, as if countless evenings past and present have folded themselves into one another, creating a single, continuous moment of quiet. In the older world, this was understood without explanation. People did not think of sleep as an isolated act. It was something communities did together, even when they lay apart. Windows darkened across the village at roughly the same hour. Voices faded in unison. Fires dimmed, one by one. The night was not empty. It was inhabited. If you imagine those lights going out slowly, patiently, you may sense a familiar comfort. The reassurance that others too have ended their day. That you are not the last one awake, keeping watch alone. Even now, somewhere beyond your awareness, someone else is settling in. Another curtain closing. Another breath deepening. This knowledge requires no response. It is simply there. In monasteries, this shared rest was almost tangible. Cells darkened along narrow corridors. Footsteps ceased. The bell, having completed its final task, remained silent. Yet even in silence, presence lingered. The building itself seemed to rest. Stone released the day's warmth slowly. Air cooled and settled. The night wrapped around everything evenly, without preference. This equality of rest mattered. No one slept better than another. No one was left behind in wakefulness. Sleep was not a reward. It was a state the night offered freely. Over centuries, this understanding traveled quietly through time. It embedded itself in gestures, in expectations, in the way people instinctively prepare for bed. The soft sigh after turning off a light. The final glance at a familiar room. The easing of the body into stillness. These moments carry memory within them. Not specific memories, but a sense of belonging to something larger. If you feel that sense now, even faintly, it is not imagined. It is the echo of countless nights lived before you. Rest is one of the few experiences humans have always shared. Across cultures, across centuries, across belief and language, everyone, eventually, has needed the night to hold them. And the night has always done so, without question. As the story continues to thin, what remains is the shared understanding that you are not alone in letting go. That rest does not separate you from the world, it returns you to it gently. If you notice awareness drifting now, if moments slip past without shape or thought, there is nothing missing. This is where the story was always leading, toward a place where nothing needs to be followed. In the older world, storytellers knew when to stop. They recognized the signs. Slower breathing, stillness, the absence of response. The story had become unnecessary. Tonight, we approach that same threshold. Words are already less distinct. Images no longer insist on forming. All that remains is a quiet sense of continuity. A feeling that rest has always been here, waiting patiently. You do not need to arrive anywhere. You are already inside the moment. If sleep takes you now, the story will not mind. It will remain unfinished, as all good bedtime stories are. If wakefulness lingers softly, that is also welcome. The night has room for both. Soon, there will be only the simplest awareness left. Breath, stillness, dark, and even those will fade, until nothing remains but rest itself. There comes a point in every gentle evening when words begin to lose their edges. They are still present, still moving softly through the air, but they no longer ask to be held. They drift, they thin, they become more like texture than meaning. This is where the story naturally belongs now, not in explanation, not in history, but in atmosphere. In the older world, this moment was understood instinctively. Storytellers would lower their voices. Phrases would lengthen. Silences would appear between sentences, not as pauses to be filled, but as spaces to rest within. No one feared these spaces. They were signs that the night was doing its work. If you notice now that you are listening differently, less with the mind, more with the body, that is exactly right. You may not remember the last sentence clearly. You may not remember the one before it. Memory is no longer required. Long ago, when lamps burned low and rooms were lit only by embers, people allowed themselves to slip into this state without naming it. Eyes would close not all at once, but gradually. Breathing would slow without instruction. The body would grow heavier, as if gently anchored. Stories did not end. They simply stopped being needed. The same is true here. Nothing dramatic remains to be said, only the quiet continuation of rhythm. Imagine, if you wish, the familiar sounds returning once more. A distant bell, now barely audible. The soft movement of fabric settling. The faint hush of night air against stone or glass. These sounds do not form a scene anymore. They form a feeling. A sense that the world has narrowed to exactly the size it needs to be. In this space, there is no timeline. Past and present lose their separation. The monastery, the village, your room, all exist together, layered gently rather than divided. Time becomes circular again, a breath in, a breath out. Nothing more is required. If thoughts arise, they do so without urgency. They may drift across awareness like clouds, unexamined and unheld. There is no need to follow them, no need to push them away. They will move on when they are ready. The body understands this language. It has heard it before. Every night, in one form or another, it has been invited into rest. Sometimes gently, sometimes reluctantly. Tonight, the invitation is patient. There is no expectation that you fall asleep at a certain moment. There is no measure of success or failure. Rest is already happening. Even wakeful stillness is a form of rest. In the older world, people trusted this. They did not worry if sleep arrived immediately. They allowed darkness to do its work in its own time. Eventually, it always did. As words continue to soften, you may notice sensations becoming simpler still. Warmth, weight, stillness. The mind, having nothing left to solve, begins to release its grip naturally. This is not something you do. It is something that happens when effort is no longer required. If you drift away from the story entirely, that is welcome. The story does not need an audience anymore. It has returned to what it always was, a gentle companion at the edge of sleep. Somewhere beyond awareness, the rhythm continues. Curtains are drawn, lights are dimmed. Breathing deepens. The night moves forward, not rushing, not pausing, just flowing. You are carried within it. Nothing needs to be remembered. Nothing needs to be decided. If the words blur now, let them blur. If they disappear, let them go. This space does not collapse without them. It remains quiet, stable, enough. Soon there will be nothing left to follow. Only rest. Imagine a place where nothing rushes, where even decisions take their time to settle into the earth. Even when everything is still, the mind keeps moving softly restless, like wind brushing old stone. Tonight, imagine something slower. Imagine a place where nothing rushes, where even decisions take their time to settle into the earth. A place where mistakes are not erased, only gently layered over, until they become part of the landscape. Let your breathing soften. There is nothing to remember, nothing to solve, only a story that moves at the pace of candlelight. Picture a small medieval town, resting under a sky without electricity. The moon hangs low, pale, and patient, watching rooftops that have leaned into one another for centuries. Streets curve not because they were designed that way, but because feet kept choosing the same path, night after night, year after year. Stone remembers everything, and so do laws. Not the loud kind written for glory or conquest, but the quiet ones, written quickly, nervously, in moments when someone simply wanted tomorrow to be easier than today. Before we drift deeper into tonight's gentle journey, remember to subscribe to Tedious History for Sleep. Here, you'll always find peaceful stories that soothe the heart and quiet the mind. Where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment. Your presence adds warmth to this quiet corner of the night. Now, let us continue. In this town, long ago, bread mattered more than gold. Not because it was sacred, but because it was necessary. Bread was breakfast, lunch, and sometimes the only promise of dinner. It was held in calloused hands, broken slowly, shared without ceremony. And when bread became scarce, when harvests failed or grain grew thin, fear arrived quietly, slipping between the wooden beams of every home. It was during one of those uncertain seasons that someone, somewhere, decided to write a law. Not a grand law, not a thoughtful one, a temporary one. The kind of rule born from worry rather than wisdom. The law was simple. Bread must weigh a certain amount. Not more, not less. The intention was gentle, even kind. If bakers could not shrink loaves during famine, then families would suffer less. At least that was the hope. No one imagined the law would last, certainly not 6 centuries. But history has a way of falling asleep on decisions that were meant to be undone later. The law was written in careful ink, perhaps by a tired clerk whose fingers were stained with grain dust and candle soot. He likely thought, this will help for now. For now is a phrase history takes very seriously. Years passed, harvests returned, kings changed, languages softened, vowels shifted, prayers were rewritten. But the bread law remained. Like a stone left in a field long after the fence was gone, bakers learned to live with it. Not because it made sense, but because it was familiar. And familiar things feel safer at night. Some bakers measured carefully. Others guessed. Most simply tried their best, trusting that tomorrow would not bring trouble. But tomorrow sometimes did, because the law did not sleep even when people did. Soon, there were officials whose only task was to weigh bread. Quiet men, moving through markets at dawn, lifting loaves with practiced hands. Not angry, not cruel, just doing what the world had quietly asked them to do. They were called bread inspectors, a real profession. One that existed only because no one ever returned to erase a temporary sentence from a fading page. If a loaf was too light, there were consequences. Not dramatic ones, not always. Sometimes a fine, sometimes public embarrassment, sometimes worse. But tonight, we do not linger on punishment. We linger on the stillness around it, on the way the market sounded at that hour. The soft murmur of voices, the creak of wooden stalls, the gentle thud of bread placed on scales that had been balanced thousands of times before. The inspector would nod or frown or say nothing at all, and life would continue. What is curious and quietly comforting is that no one set out to create something absurd. No one intended to build a system that outlived wars, plagues, and entire dynasties. They were simply tired people trying to survive a difficult season. And somehow their solution learned how to stay. If you've ever kept something longer than you meant to, a habit, a worry, an old rule you placed on yourself, you already understand medieval Europe better than you think. The mind likes what is already there. Change requires energy. Keeping things as they are requires only sleep. As the town settles into night, imagine a baker closing his shop. He sweeps the floor, dust rising slowly in the lantern light. Tomorrow he will bake again. Not because the law demands it, but because people will wake up hungry. The bread law rests quietly beside him, unspoken, unquestioned. And outside, the moon watches everything with the same expression it has always worn. In the next part of our journey, we will walk deeper into this world of quiet persistence, where temporary solutions became traditions, and no one remembered the moment they stopped asking why. For now, let your thoughts loosen their grip. There is nothing you need to carry forward. The story will remember itself. Morning arrives in the medieval town without urgency. There is no alarm, no sudden call to action. Just a gradual brightening of stone walls and timber frames as daylight finds its way through narrow streets. The town wakes the way a body does, slowly, instinctively, without instruction. Somewhere, a bell rings. Not loudly, not to command. Just enough to let people know that the day has decided to begin. The bell has been ringing for generations. No one remembers who first pulled the rope or why the sound was chosen. It simply works, and so it remains. Below the bell tower, the market begins to gather itself. Stalls are unfolded. Wood scrapes softly against wood. Cloth awnings stretch and sigh as they catch the air. Baskets appear, filled with apples dulled by travel, roots dusted with earth, and loaves of bread round, pale, familiar. Bread always looks the same here. Not because imagination is lacking, but because sameness is comforting. People like knowing what their hands will find. A woman reaches for a loaf without thinking. Her fingers already understand its weight. She does not weigh it. She does not question it. Trust is built from repetition. Nearby, a bread inspector stands quietly. He does not announce himself. There is no uniform to speak of, only a small scale hanging from his belt, polished smooth by years of use. He waits. The inspector is not feared, not really. He is part of the market, like the smell of grain or the sound of coins touching. When he lifts a loaf, he does so gently. This is not a hunt, it is a ritual. The scale dips, balances, settles. Most loaves pass without comment. A nod, a step back. Life moves forward. What is remarkable is how little anyone thinks about the rule itself. No one debates its fairness in the early light. No one argues whether it still serves a purpose. It has crossed an invisible line from decision into tradition. And traditions are rarely questioned, especially in the morning. As the day unfolds, the town breathes in small, predictable rhythms. Animals pass through streets too narrow to avoid them. Hooves tap against stone, bells softly chiming not just on livestock, but sometimes on children stitched loosely to their clothing so parents can hear where they wander. Sound becomes a kind of map. You always know where things are, even when you do not look. Inside a nearby tavern, the floor is covered with straw. Not new straw, not old straw. Just straw. Layer upon layer, pressed flat by years of boots, spills, and quiet conversations. No one cleans it away completely. Why would they? It has always been this way. Each new layer is a small promise that tomorrow will be similar to today. The tavern keeper does not remember when the straw began to stay. Only that removing it once seemed unnecessary and then, eventually, unthinkable. Temporary solutions, when repeated, develop roots. They do not ask permission. They simply remain. Outside, the road curves gently past the tavern, bending where puddles once formed, where carts learned to avoid mud, where footsteps agreed without discussion that this was the better way. Roads are not designed here. They are remembered. And so it is with rules. The bread law continues, not because anyone insists, but because no one stops. There is a quiet kindness in this if you look at it gently. A recognition that life is already difficult enough without constant revision. People are tired. They are busy surviving, loving, losing, hoping. To rewrite the world takes energy few can spare. And so, instead, they live within it. If you listen closely, you might notice how this world hums rather than shouts. No one rushes. Time stretches loose and forgiving. And somewhere between the ringing of bells and the weight of bread, the mind begins to soften. If you have ever found comfort in routine, making the same cup of tea, walking the same path, listening to the same voice at night, you understand why these temporary things stayed. Not because they were perfect, but because they were known. And known things feel safe when the day grows long. As the afternoon fades, shadows stretch across the market stones. Stalls are folded away. The inspector returns his scale to its place, never thinking that his role is unusual. To him, this is simply how the world works, and perhaps that is the most soothing truth of all. That much of history was not shaped by grand plans, but by small choices repeated until they became invisible. In the next part of our journey, we will follow one of those invisible threads a little further into debts that outlived the people who made them, and promises written so softly they never faded. For now, let your shoulders rest. There is no need to remember every detail. The story will carry you, just as it always has. As evening settles over the town, the light changes its tone. Daylight does not disappear here, it withdraws politely. It slips behind chimneys, folds itself into doorways, and leaves behind a glow that feels remembered rather than seen. This is the hour when stories grow quieter. Inside the tavern, a fire breathes softly, not roaring. Just enough to remind the room that warmth still exists. People arrive without hurry. They know where to sit. They always do. A man takes a mug from the counter, its handle worn smooth by hands that are no longer alive. He does not think about who held it first. He only knows that it fits his grip. The tavern keeper pours ale carefully. Not because the liquid is precious, but because spilling has consequences that linger. Here, nothing ever truly disappears, especially not debts. Long ago, perhaps on a night much like this one, someone drank more than they could pay for. Not recklessly, not with intention. Just a few extra mugs, offered during conversation, during laughter, during a moment when tomorrow felt far away. The tavern keeper, kind or tired or both, said, "Pay me later." Later is another phrase history holds onto tightly. The name was written down, a small mark beside it. Nothing dramatic. Just ink on a page that would be folded, stored, and forgotten. Or so it seemed. Years passed. The man who drank the ale grew older. His hair thinned. His steps slowed. Eventually, he stopped coming altogether. But the mark remained. When his son came to the tavern years later, the keeper glanced at the ledger. Same name, a familiar curve of letters. The debt was small, almost symbolic. But symbols matter. Your father owed 6 gallons, the keeper said, not unkindly. The son blinked, confused, then nodded. Of course he did, because arguing would require energy. And energy is precious, and so the debt passed hands. Not like a burden, more like an heirloom no one asked for. By the time the grandson heard the story, it had softened into routine. This is simply something our family has always owed. No one questioned the fairness. No one traced the origin back to that warm night of laughter and borrowed time. The debt did not grow. It did not punish. It just stayed like a chair no one moves because it has always been there. If you listen closely, you can hear how gently these things attach themselves to life. They do not arrive shouting. They do not announce importance. They wait, and waiting is powerful. Around the tavern, conversation drifts like smoke. Someone speaks of weather. Someone else of roads too muddy to bother fixing. There is no urgency in their voices. People here accept the world as it presents itself, slightly inconvenient, deeply familiar. The straw beneath their feet compresses further with every step, creating layers that no one intends to study, yet one day will be read like pages of a book. Each layer tells a quiet story, of spills cleaned half-heartedly, of tears dropped unnoticed, of laughter absorbed into the floor and never returned. Above it all, the fire flickers, casting shadows that move slower than the people who create them. Time stretches, and with it, the understanding that not everything must be resolved to be lived with. If you've ever carried a thought that was never finished, a promise half made, a habit you meant to stop someday, you are not alone. The medieval world was full of these unfinished sentences. They did not see them as failures, just as facts of being human. Outside, the night deepens. A bell rings again, marking nothing more than the passage of hours. No meeting, no command, just reassurance. The road outside the tavern glistens slightly, worn smooth by generations of feet choosing the same imperfect route. No one remembers the first footprint, only that this is the way home. As the tavern begins to empty, the keeper closes the ledger. He does not review the debts. He does not count them. He trusts that tomorrow will resemble today closely enough. And that trust is what allows him to sleep. In the quiet that follows, the town rests inside its habits like a well-worn coat. Nothing presses. Nothing demands. Everything simply exists. In the next part of our journey, we will look beneath our feet into floors that became archives, and solutions that turned into landscapes without anyone noticing. For now, let the weight of the day lift slightly. You do not need to settle every account tonight. Some things are allowed to remain unfinished. The story will keep watch. There are places that remember quietly. They do not speak. They do not interrupt. They simply hold. In the medieval town, memory lives beneath the feet. Inside the tavern, the straw-covered floor has grown dense over the years. Not from carelessness, but from continuity. Each season, fresh straw is scattered across the ground. Not to replace what came before, but to soften it. To make standing easier. To make waiting more comfortable. No one sweeps the old layers away entirely. Why would they? They no longer feel old. They feel like the floor. With every footstep, the ground compresses slightly, settling itself into a shape that matches the room. Spilled ale disappears downward. Mud loosens its grip. Time folds itself into something firm enough to trust. The people here do not think of it as unhygienic. They think of it as normal. And normal, when shared by everyone, rarely feels wrong. If you were to kneel down very gently and press your palm into the straw, you would feel warmth lingering there. Not heat, just the echo of bodies that stood and talked and rested in the space long before tonight. The floor has learned the rhythm of human presence. It knows where people gather most often, where conversations pause, where laughter once spilled out and sank quietly between fibers. No one planned this. No one said, "Let us build a record of ourselves beneath our feet." It happened because cleaning was postponed and then postponed again, until postponement became policy. Temporary solutions do not announce their permanence. They settle in while no one is watching. Centuries later, scholars would call these floors archaeological layers. They would read them like books, each stratum a chapter, each stain a sentence. But the people who walked across them never imagined such scrutiny. They only knew that the floor was softer than stone, kinder to tired legs, forgiving to cold nights. And forgiveness is something people instinctively keep. Outside the tavern, the street curves in its familiar way. It does not follow a ruler. It follows agreement. Long ago, someone avoided a puddle. Someone else followed the same dry patch. Soon enough, the ground learned the preference. No council meeting was held. No map was redrawn. The road shaped itself around human hesitation. And once shaped, it resisted change. Mud dries. Ruts deepen. Memory hardens. You can see this everywhere in the town. Doors placed oddly because the original wall collapsed once. Windows misaligned because rebuilding was easier than redesigning. Chimneys leaning just enough to remind you that perfection was never the goal. Only survival. Only continuity. Inside homes, families move carefully through spaces that no longer match their original purpose. A corner once meant for storage becomes a sleeping place. A hallway built for convenience becomes tradition. Children grow up learning these spaces as truths, not accidents. They do not ask why. They simply adapt. And adaptation, when repeated, becomes identity. In the evening, parents fasten small bells to their children's clothing. Not out of fear, but practicality. The sound lets them know where wandering feet have gone. Soon, the children learn to run simply to hear the ringing follow them. A solution becomes a game. A precaution becomes delight. No one stops to ask if the bells are still needed. They are already part of childhood. And so the town continues to layer itself habit upon habit, solution upon solution. Not because it is blind, but because it is tired. And there's a quiet mercy in that. If you have ever left something unfinished, not because you forgot, but because finishing it felt unnecessary, you are touching the same impulse. Not everything unfinished is broken. Some things are simply resting. As night grows deeper, the tavern empties again. Footsteps compress the straw one last time. The fire settles into embers. The floor holds everything without comment. Above it all, the building stands not straight, not symmetrical, but familiar enough to trust. This is how places learn to last. Not through design, but through acceptance. In the next part of our journey, we will follow that acceptance upward into grand buildings that were never quite finished properly, and royal decisions made just for now that stayed far longer than intended. For now, let your thoughts drift downward, like straw settling, like memory folding into earth. Nothing is required of you in this moment. The story knows where it is going. There are moments when practicality quietly rearranges the world, not with intention, not with elegance, just with necessity. In the medieval town, as the streets fall silent and homes retreat into candlelit stillness, certain structures reveal their secrets not loudly but patiently. Castles, for instance. From the outside, they appear deliberate, strong, thoughtful, stone stacked with purpose. Towers rising as if they always knew where to stand. But inside, the truth is softer, less planned, more human. In one such castle, deep within its walls, the kitchen sits beside a place no one speaks of comfortably, a latrine. Not because anyone thought it ideal, but because, once long ago, there was an emergency. Perhaps the original kitchen collapsed. Perhaps a fire forced relocation. Perhaps winter demanded speed over sets. The details are unimportant now. What matters is that someone said, just for now. And just for now, stayed. The kitchen was built close to the latrine for convenience. Water access, waste removal, temporary logic. No one imagined it would remain that way for centuries. But stone is patient. Once built, it resists revision. Cooks adapted, servants learned the paths. Meals were prepared with care, despite the awkward arrangement. Life did not pause to complain. It adjusted. Over time, the smell faded into expectation. The proximity became invisible. Children born into the castle knew no other layout. To them, this was simply how kitchens were placed. History often works like this, quietly overriding intention with familiarity. Outside the castle walls, moats tell a similar story. They look strategic now, symbolic, but their beginnings were humbler. At first, a moat was nothing more than a hurried ditch, dug in fear, meant to slow feet, not armies. Earth piled quickly. Water collected accidentally. It was never meant to define power. Yet once the ditch existed, it stayed. Water deepened, stone followed. Soon, what began as panic hardened into prestige. Visitors admired the reflection of walls in still water. They spoke of strength. No one remembered the shaking hands that first held the shovel. And no one thought to fill the moat back in, because now it looked intentional. This is how meaning is layered onto accident, and how accidents are forgiven by time. Inside homes, this same pattern repeats in smaller ways. A table placed against the wall to save space remains there forever. A doorway blocked during repairs becomes a storage nook. A ladder meant for temporary access turns into a permanent staircase. People adapt first, then forget, then defend. If you were to ask why something is the way it is, the answer is often simple, because it has always been this way. And that answer, though unsatisfying, is deeply comforting. It removes responsibility. It allows rest. As the night deepens, the castle grows quiet. In the kitchen, embers fade beneath ash. The walls hold the warmth of the day. Nearby, the quiet corner exists as it always has, unremarked, accepted. Stone does not judge proximity. It only remembers placement. If you have ever accepted something inconvenient simply because changing it felt harder than living with it, you are sharing a moment with the past. Not out of laziness, out of conservation. Energy is precious. The medieval world understood this instinctively. They did not waste effort correcting what no longer caused pain, even if it once did. Outside, the moat reflects the moon without commentary. Still water, still walls. Fear has transformed into beauty, and beauty rarely invites questions. Somewhere in the castle, a guard shifts his weight. He does not think about why he stands where he does, only that this is his place. The bell tolls softly, marking time without instruction, and the world remains arranged as it was left. In the next part of our journey, we will look at names, those small labels meant for convenience that grew roots deep enough to follow families across centuries. For now, allow your thoughts to drift like reflections in water. Nothing needs to be fixed tonight. Some things are allowed to stay exactly where they are. The story will wait. Names at first were not meant to last, they were tools. Small verbal shortcuts passed between neighbors who already knew one another well enough. In the medieval town, a name was rarely enough on its own. There were too many Johns, too many Margarets, too many Williams moving through the same narrow streets. So people added something gentle, something practical. John by the river, Margaret with the red hair, William who works the mill. These were not identities. They were directions. No one imagined they would be inherited. On a quiet morning, inside a small stone building that smelled faintly of dust and ink, a clerk dipped his quill into a shallow pot. He was tired. His back ached. The light was poor. He was recording taxes or births or land details meant to organize life, not define it. A man stood before him. "John," the man said. The clerk looked up, then down again. "Which John?" There was no impatience in the question, only habit. "John," the man repeated, then added softly. "The one with the crooked nose." The clerk paused, then wrote it down. John Crooked Nose. Not as an insult, not as a judgment, simply as clarification. Ink touched parchment. The page accepted it without protest. That was all it took. John went home. The clerk moved on. Neither of them thought about it again. Years later, John's son stood in the same place. The clerk, older now, or perhaps replaced by another, opened the same ledger. He traced the name with a finger. "Ah," he said. "Crooked Nose." The son nodded. It sounded strange, but familiar. He had heard it before, and so the name passed on. Not because anyone chose it, but because it was already there. History loves what is already written. Over time, the meaning softened. No one looked at the son's face for the trait. No one cared whether the nose was straight or bent. The word had detached itself from the body. It no longer described. It simply identified. Across the town, similar things happened. Occupations became surnames. Miller, Smith, Baker. Places became identities. Hill, brook, field. Even moments of humor or impatience were preserved. Short, long, brown. These were not meant to define generations. They were meant to help one tired clerk finish his work before dusk. But ink is patient. And paper remembers more faithfully than people do. Children grew into adults carrying names that told stories no one could recall fully. Why were they called that? No one knew. Only that it had always been so. And familiarity once again took the place of intention. There is something quietly tender about this. That so much of who we are is shaped by moments of convenience rather than design. No grand ceremony, no dramatic decision, just a quill moving because it needed to. If you have ever been labeled in a way that followed you longer than expected, a role, a habit, a version of yourself created in passing, you understand this inheritance. It was never meant to be heavy, but weight accumulates. As night falls over the town, households gather close. Candles burn low. Voices soften. Names are spoken gently now, stripped of origin, filled instead with affection. Parents call children by surnames without thinking. The words feel warm in the mouth. They belong. No one wonders if they were once accidental. Accidents, when repeated, become truths. And truths, when lived with long enough, become invisible. Outside, the bell marks another hour. Not to instruct, only to reassure. Time continues. The ledger remains closed for the night. Inside it, names rest quietly. No longer descriptions, no longer jokes, no longer shortcuts. They have become anchors. In the next part of our journey, we will gather these quiet truths together: laws, debts, floors, kitchens, names, and gently step back to see what they form when viewed from a distance. For now, let your own name rest lightly on you. You do not need to explain it. You do not need to justify it. Tonight, it is simply a sound that belongs to you. The story continues to breathe softly in the dark. The mind relaxes when it does not have to decide, and relaxation is a form of survival. What demands effort fades. This is not failure. It is the quiet negotiation between humanity and time. As the night stretches on, the road beyond the town disappears into darkness, but not uncertainty. It has been walked enough to know where it leads. You do not need to see it clearly to trust it. If your own life carries paths you never meant to follow for this long, let that be gentle knowledge rather than judgment. You are not behind. You are simply walking on something that learned your footsteps. In the next part of our journey, we will gather all these quiet, temporary things together and step back far enough to see the shape they make when viewed as a whole. For now, let your breathing slow. There is no destination you must reach tonight. the road knows how to hold you. There comes a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, when curiosity loosens its grip. Not because answers have been found, but because the questions no longer feel necessary. In the medieval town, that moment arrived gradually. No single generation decided to stop asking why the bread was weighed, why the road curved, why names carried echoes of long-forgotten traits. The questions simply thinned. They drifted away like mist in morning light. Life was already full of planting and waiting, of repairing and resting, of caring for those who could not carry themselves. Why reopen decisions that no longer hurt? Why disturb arrangements that had learned to hold everyone gently enough? And so the world settled. The bread law remained not as authority, but as background. It existed the way gravity does, unseen, unchallenged. Children grew up knowing the weight of a loaf before they knew its price. Their hands learned it instinctively. No explanation required. This is how knowledge becomes instinct, by staying long enough to bypass thought. In the castle, servants moved through hallways shaped by compromise. They did not complain about kitchens near quiet corners. They had adapted. Adaptation, after all, is a form of peace. Moats were no longer symbols of fear. They reflected sunlight. Held fish. They were beautiful now. Beauty forgives origins. In the tavern, debts continued to be remembered. Not because they mattered deeply, but because they had always been remembered. And remembering is easier than revising. The straw floor thickened imperceptibly. No one noticed when it crossed the threshold from mess to memory. It simply became ground. Names passed gently from mouth to mouth, losing their edges. Crooked noses straightened. Hair changed color. The names stayed. They no longer described. They belonged. All of this created a world that felt stable, not because it was carefully maintained, but because it was rarely disturbed. The medieval mind understood something modern life often forgets. Stability does not always come from improvement. Sometimes it comes from agreement to let things be. As night deepens again, the town rests within this agreement. No one lies awake planning reform. No one drafts new systems by candlelight. The future will arrive on its own. For now, sleep is more urgent. If you listen closely, you can feel how this collective rest settles into the stones. The town exhales. And in that exhale, time slows. This is not stagnation. It is conservation. A way of carrying limited strength across many years. If you have ever felt relief in accepting something as good enough, not perfect, not ideal, but workable, you have shared this instinct. The medieval world was built by people who understood limits. They did not chase endless optimization. They sought continuity. And continuity, once achieved, was protected quietly. The bell rings once more. Not to signal change. Only to reassure those who are half asleep that the world is still there. That nothing has slipped. That tomorrow will resemble today closely enough. And that resemblance is comforting. As the moon moves slowly across the sky, shadows shift across roofs that have been repaired many times, but never redesigned. Each repair honored what came before it, not out of reverence, out of habit. And habit, when shared, becomes culture. In the next part of our journey, we will gently step back even further to see how all these temporary things, layered together, form something unexpectedly enduring. For now, let your thoughts rest in this moment where questions have softened. You do not need answers tonight. You do not need to understand everything you carry. Some things stay with us simply because they arrived during moments when we were too busy living to let them go. And that too is human. The story is still awake. You may rest. Seen from a distance, the medieval town looks intentional. Its walls form a rough circle. Its towers rise where they seem to belong. Its roads appear to lead exactly where they should. But this sense of order is an illusion, soft, comforting, and incomplete, because nothing here was built all at once. The town did not emerge from a plan. It emerged from accumulation, from choices made when no one was thinking about the future, only the present moment, the coming winter, the next meal. And yet, When all those moments settle together, they shape something enduring. The bread law, the debts, the floors, the kitchens, the names, the roads. Each one was small, each one temporary, and each one, left alone long enough, became part of the town's skeleton. No single generation decided, this is who we will be. They simply lived, and living, repeated often enough, becomes structure. At night, when the town is quiet and even the bells have gone still, this structure becomes visible not to the eye, but to the feeling. You can sense how little effort is required to exist here. Everything already knows where it belongs. The baker wakes before dawn, not because the law compels him, but because the rhythm does. The inspector arrives, not because he questions the rule, but because the day expects him. The tavern keeper opens the ledger without resentment. The debt is small. It has lost its sting. The straw floor yields softly beneath familiar feet. No one thinks about removing it. Removing it would change the sound of the room, change the way people stand, change the memory of the place. And memory matters more than cleanliness. In the castle, servants move through passages shaped by long-ago urgency. They do not complain. Complaining would require imagining an alternative. And alternatives are tiring. Names are spoken that once meant something else entirely. No one remembers what. The names have done their job. They have endured. Outside, the roads curve in the same forgiving way they always have. They ask nothing of travelers except trust, and travelers give it freely. Because the road has never betrayed them. What is remarkable is not that these things stayed. It is that no one felt the need to justify them. In this world, justification is a luxury. Energy is spent where it matters most. Warmth, food, care. Everything else is allowed to remain imperfect. This creates a quiet kind of stability, not rigid, not flawless, but gentle. If a rule no longer hurts, it is allowed to sleep. If a habit still works, it is allowed to stay. If a solution solved yesterday's problem well enough, no one rushes to undo it today. This is not a lack of intelligence. It is a deep understanding of limits. The medieval mind did not seek constant improvement. It sought continuity, a way to carry fragile human lives across uncertain time. As the night deepens, the town becomes almost indistinguishable from the darkness around it. Lights dim, windows go black. Only the outline remains. A shape built from moments no one thought were important enough to record. Yet here they are recorded in stone, in habit, in silence. If you step back far enough, you can see how all the temporary things lean against one another. The bread law supports the market. The market supports the tavern. The tavern supports the road. The road supports the town. Remove one, and the shape shifts, so no one removes them. Not out of fear, out of care. If you have ever kept something in your life, not because it was perfect, but because it helped you get through a difficult season, you already understand this town. Maybe it was a routine, a belief, a way of seeing yourself. Maybe it started as a temporary measure, just for now. And then, quietly it stayed. Not because you forgot to change it, but because it no longer asked to be changed. The medieval world did not hurry toward answers. It rested inside questions until the questions grew tired. And when the questions fell silent, life continued peacefully. As the moon reaches its highest point, the town breathes as one body. No one is awake trying to improve it. No one is awake worrying about its logic. The world is allowed to be exactly as it is, and in that allowance there is rest. In the final part of our journey, we will let this understanding settle, completely returning gently to the present, carrying with us the quiet truth that not everything meant to be temporary needs to be removed. Some things are allowed to become home. For now, let the shape of this world hold you. There is nothing left to figure out tonight. Everything important has already found its place. The night no longer feels separate from the town. It has become part of it. Stone and shadow blend together now, edges softened, details forgiven by darkness. The medieval town rests the way a long-lived body does, familiar with its own weight, unafraid of stillness. Nothing stirs urgently. Nothing asks to be changed. And in this quiet, something gentle becomes clear. All the temporary things we have followed, the bread law, the debts, the floors, the kitchens, the names, the roads were never mistakes. They were pauses. Moments where humanity chose rest over revision. The bread law still exists somewhere in parchment and memory, but tonight it has no authority. It sleeps. Not abolished, not corrected, simply outgrown by time. It once mattered deeply. It protected people when hunger loomed close. Then hunger moved on, and the law stayed behind, not as control, but as echo. A reminder that care often begins as urgency and ends as habit. The market is dark now. Stalls folded, scales resting. No inspector weighs bread in moonlight. The town trusts itself again. Trust is what remains when rules loosen their grip. In the tavern, the fire has gone cold. The straw floor holds the warmth of countless evenings, compressed into something solid enough to stand on. If someone were to dig beneath it layer by layer, they would uncover spilled ale, dust, laughter, and time. No one does. Because some records are meant to remain buried, not hidden, just respected. The ledger rests closed on the counter. Names written inside it no longer feel like obligations. They feel like lineage. The debt passed through generations has lost its edge. It has become a story more than a burden. And stories weigh less than numbers. In the castle, kitchens remain where they were hastily placed. Servants know the paths by heart. Walls have learned their footsteps. Nothing here is ideal. Everything here is known. And known things allow the mind to rest. Outside, the moat reflects the sky without memory of fear. It holds moonlight now, not enemies. It has been forgiven by time. The roads curve gently through darkness, carrying no urgency. They do not demand direction. They simply accept movement. The road has learned that people will follow what feels kindest to tired feet. And it has shaped itself accordingly. Names drift through sleep spoken softly by parents checking on children, whispered by lovers half awake, remembered by the elderly without attachment to origin. The names no longer describe, they accompany, and that may be their greatest purpose. Stepping back farther now, you can see the full shape of the town. It was not built by visionaries. It was shaped by people who postponed decisions because survival mattered more than perfection. People who chose familiarity over improvement. People who allowed the world to stay imperfect if it meant staying gentle. This is not failure. This is endurance. If history were a voice, it would not shout lessons. It would murmur reassurance. It would say, you do not need to fix everything tonight. You do not need to understand everything you carry. You do not need to erase every temporary thing that stayed longer than expected. Some things remain because they helped you once. And that is reason enough. The medieval world did not fear incompleteness. It lived inside it. And because of that, it slept deeply. As the night reaches its quietest hour, the town becomes almost weightless. Time loosens its hold. The past no longer presses forward. The future does not intrude. There is only now, only breath. Only the gentle understanding that life does not need to be optimized to be meaningful. If tonight's story reminded you of a beautiful memory one you had almost forgotten, feel free to share it below. When was the last time you looked up at the night sky and felt at peace? Here, no one rests alone. Every story is a soft lantern in the dark. If this story brought you calm, leave a gentle comment for yourself. And don't forget to subscribe for more peaceful nighttime journeys with tedious history for sleep. Now let the town fade gently from view. Let the roads disappear into darkness they trust. Let the temporary things sleep where they are. You have nothing left to carry, nothing left to solve. Only rest, only quiet, only the kindness of time, finally moving slowly enough to match your breath. Good night.